in the chat, Ariba, when you started recording. Or say something when you started recording. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, thank you. All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the VSCode Can Do That workshop, brought to you by the Master Google DSC. Today, we're going to kick off winter 2021 term with a workshop about tips, tricks, and hacks that can sort of unlock the full potential of your developer workflow with VS Code. So before we get into things and get things kicking off, just a little bit about myself. I'll be the speaker, Jay Modi, and I'm the AI lead for the workshops and talks team at the DSC. And you might be wondering, what is an AI lead doing a workshop on VS Code, which has like nothing to do with AI? Well, honestly, I just really like VS Code. I'm really passionate about it. And I think no matter what kind of developer you are, whether front end, back end, ML, DevOps, anything, having a optimized like workflow can really benefit you, like no matter what you're doing as a developer. With that, this is going to be today's agenda. We're going to start off quick three minutes on what VS Code is, and we have some slides for that. Then we'll get into the basics of VS Code, like navigating, what command palette is, sort of the essentials and philosophy behind VS Code. Then we'll get into some tricks for editing code, some tricks and hacks for navigating code. We'll go through a real world example where I'll go through a bunch of really, really important features like debugging, Git, code quality, auto formatting, all that good stuff. And then if we have time at the end, I'll cap it off with a note about customization and settings and how that's handled in VS Code. And then I'll also go through some useful extensions that might interest you, and also how to do remote development in VS Code. Okay, so what is VS Code? So Visual Studio Code is one of the most widely used code editors by developers. It was released just 5 years ago, like the actual first release was just 5 years ago, and it's created and maintained by Microsoft. And despite being super new, as you can see from the screenshot I just posted there, that's the 2019 Stack Overflow developer survey, where they asked participants, and there were like 200,000 developers from around the world that answered the survey. And they asked them, what's your primary development environment? And despite only being 4 years mature at that point, VS Code topped that list by a large margin than any other code editor that's out there. As you can see, it's there at the top at just up over 50%. And then the next one over is Visual Studio. So you can see it's a very popular code editor. So why use Visual Studio Code? Well, I don't know if that doesn't convince you, the fact that it's so new and so many people have flocked to it. Well, here's some other reasons. It's widely adopted, so there's a lot of support for it, including a large community of extension developers. So you can find an extension for literally anything. It's always being continually updated with new features and bug fixes. It supports multiple languages, which is really important for students because, as students, we're not just typically developing with one tool, but we have to sort of learn and adapt to many different tools. So it's nice to have one sort of code editor or one tool for all those different ventures. And then finally, despite being a really lightweight text like code editor, it still has some IDE features that are really important, like debugging or like code qualities or platform tools for specific workflows. So with that, as I said at the beginning, we're going to need two things for this workshop. We're going to need VS Code. Again, these links are on the events page. And we're also going to need Git installed. Does anyone not have these two things installed? I'm going to wait a couple of seconds here, and if I don't receive anything, then I think I'm good to move on. I'll take a water break. Okay, I think we're good to move on. Okay, good. So next, there we go. So let's actually start coding. So on the events page, I've linked the GitHub repository. We're just going to keep that there for now. Let's open it up. Oops. And is there a way to move this? This is a little annoying. There we go. Okay, awesome. So the repository just has just to note, the repository has an agenda of what we're going to be covering. So if you need to refer back, well, maybe after you're watching the recording, this is where to go. It'll cover this has all the topics we'll be covering in order. But let's get started. Let's actually open up VS Code. And let me move this back. Okay, so when you open up VS Code, you'll be greeted with this interface. Compared to IDEs, they're actually quite minimal, and I'm gonna go ahead and increase the size of this so you guys can see better. But we're gonna get ourselves oriented here. So we're gonna start off with an interface overview. So we're gonna go ahead and click the interface overview, and this will just give you just a brief interface overview so you can see there's a file explorer on the left side, searching across files, Git management, launch and debug, manage extensions, integrated terminal. But really what I want to highlight is this thing right here in the middle. This is going to be probably the most important thing. Whatever shortcut it gives you, highlighted in orange on the right side, memorize it right now because it's going to be very, very important. And in fact, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to toggle integrated terminal, but I don't want to do it through the shortcut. I want to do it through command palette. This is called command palette. So on Mac, the shortcut is Command Shift P. Whoops, I hit the wrong one. Command Shift P. And you'll notice this little text editor shows up. Put this at the bottom. This little text editor, like this little line shows up with an arrow. And what we can do is we can actually search commands. Pretty much any command is available through command palette. Like anything you can imagine, it's available. So we can actually toggle integrated terminal if we wanted, right? And what's nice about this is not only is the command here, but we can also see the shortcut for the command. So throughout this workshop, if I ever mention like a tip, trick, hack, command, whatever it is, and you don't know what the shortcut is, just search it. Search it in command palette, and it'll show you what the shortcut is. Okay, so let's toggle integrated terminal. And you can see VS Code has this nice feature where it has an integrated terminal. We can type commands. It's pretty useful. Let's type git -- version just to make sure Git is installed. And as you can see, it is, which is nice and dandy. Okay. Also, I mean, just to demonstrate it again, command palette, you can do everything. Even the help page we just went over, if you just type in help with a colon, you can see all these different options, super useful. But you can actually also see that we also have the overview, I think. Yeah, the user interface overview, you can access that through command palette, which is pretty crazy. Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna clone the repository. So let's go ahead and copy the URL for the Git repository. I'm going to paste it in the Zoom chat as well, just so you guys have easy access to it. Okay, so let's copy the URL, and we could click clone repository. We can also click this sidebar and hit clone repository. But in the spirit of using command palette and getting used to sort of using that tool, we're gonna open up command palette and type clone, and then it'll show up git clone. Let's use that option, paste the URL, and then it should prompt us where we want to clone the repository. So let's start. I'm just gonna put it in my desktop. And it should give you a notification on the bottom right once it's been cloned to say, would you like to open the cloned repository? And we're gonna go ahead and click the open button. And that should open up the interface, but now you can see in our file explorer, we now have all the files for the Git repository. So you can see all the files here, and here's the Git repository with all the files. I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds here to make sure everyone has caught up and cloned the repository. Okay, it looks like everyone has it cloned. Sorry, where did you do that from? Yes, so if you type in Command Shift P on Mac, it should show up command palette. On Windows, it should be Control Shift P, and then you can type git clone, and then it'll clone it. And then I pasted the URL for the GitHub repo in the Zoom chat. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's start off, and we're going to look at the agenda we have, and we're just going to start off with just the basics, right? Gui navigation and whatnot. So let's open up basics.md. I'm actually going to double click or right click it and hit open preview just so we can see what we're going to start off with. So here's a short list of Gui navigation shortcuts that we're going to be using a little bit, or I'll be using them. So command palette, we obviously learned about that. If you type in just command P without the shift, on Windows, it should just be Control P. It'll open up command palette, but notice that it doesn't have the arrow anymore. And if I type the right arrow, it'll actually show up all command, like it's basically command palette. But if I get rid of it, then it's go to file. So I can actually open up files here. So let's say I want to go to basics.md. I can search it, hit enter, and I go to basics.md essentially. And I can go to any file here in my workspace. So I can go to like extras.md, whatever I want, I can navigate like that. And I can even go back, right? Okay. Whoops, I don't want to preview this. I want to preview basics.md. So this is useful because when you have really large projects, it's going to be a hassle to have to click around your folders. It's much faster to just search what the file name is, and it'll also sort it by your most recent files, which gives them easy access. Also, there's the shortcut for toggling integrated terminal, which is one I'm going to be using a ton, just like that. As well, I'm going to use one for going in between tabs rather than clicking them. I might use the shortcut Command-Shift square bracket. And then also you can close a window by typing Command-W or Control-W on Mac or on Windows, sorry. And also a quick note, I use a Mac, so most of the shortcuts I'll be saying the Mac shortcuts. Again, you can always search up, so like go to file, right? It's right there. And whatever platform you're on, it should be there. So when in doubt, just search it. But if you must know, these are sort of the equivalent Mac to Windows key bindings that they're sort of rough. It's not one-to-one. It's always just better to search up command palette. Okay, so that's the super basics. Now that we're oriented with the basics, we're actually going to get into the fun stuff. So that's all the boring stuff out of the way. So let's close this window and let's open up edit.py. Okay, so edit.py, this first part, we're just going to go through the basics. This is not VS Code specific, and actually these commands, you can't search them because they're just basic across like basically any app on your system, right? You can use your arrow keys and mouse as normal. You can scroll. You can also go right and left by a word by holding the Option key. So you can see instead of going like character by character, I'm going by entire words. And again, these are the basics. So you can actually do these anywhere. So you can see here on Chrome in my URL, I can actually do that as well. Same shortcut. Some other useful ones, go to the start of a line, go to the end of a line. Those are pretty useful. Go to the start of a file, so Command up. Go to the end of a file, Command down. Then we can go back to the start of the file, Command up. And we can also combine these above shortcuts with the Shift key to not just go, but to select. So let's say I want to select, like I have my cursor here, and not only do I want to go all the way to the right, but I want to select everything. So I just do Command, Shift, right, and it'll select everything. And I can do that for pretty much all the options I stated above, right? Go by word or whatever I want. And if you're really hardcore and you never want to let your hands leave the home row, instead of using up, down, left, and right, you can also use the shortcuts here, like Control-P, Control-F, and Control-B. But that's optional, of course. Okay, that's so those are the basics, not specific to VS Code, and you can't actually search any of these in Command Palette. These next ones, though, are really useful editing hacks. And as I said, each of these names that I have here commented out, you can actually open up Command Palette, paste them in, and it should give you what it's called and the shortcut. So a lot of these, I've omitted the shortcut because of that reason. I'd rather have you just search it up. Okay, so the first one is toggle line comment. So using the shortcut, what we can do is we can, from anywhere in the line, we can decide to toggle, whoops, hit the wrong button there. We can decide to toggle a comment. Now this is useful so you don't have to like go individually and like comment out every single line. That can be super annoying. And it also works with selection. So let's say I select this entire text, I can comment it all out at the same time. Another useful one is indenting or outdenting. So here I have wrong indentation. So I can indent and I can outdent. And as usual, you can search up the shortcuts, indent and outdent. And again, it also works with selection. So let's say I want to wrap this in a function. I can go def foobar or something like that. And I can select all of these lines and I can indent them. Another useful one is expand selection. These two, I feel like a lot of people already know these, no matter what text editor you're using, but expand selection is a little less known. And we're going to search up the expand selection. Now, if for some reason you don't like the shortcut that VS Code gives you, or you have a conflicting shortcut, what you can do is you can hit the settings button on the right, and you can specify your own shortcut. So here, let's use Command Shift quote. And then I can override whatever I had there before. So with that shortcut, what expand selection will do is wherever your cursor is, it'll expand the selection to the next biggest thing. So here it expands to the word, then it'll expand to the entire quotes, the brackets, the line, and then the whole file. Same thing here. We have this function call. We can expand and keep expanding. And that's useful if you want to, like, I don't know, let's say you want to replace the parameters in range instead of like using your mouse. You can just do it in one shortcut. Okay, moving on. We can also move lines up and down. So this is pretty easy. It's just a little bit more convenient than like copying and pasting or cutting and pasting. And again, as usual, can't emphasize this enough. It's always. Okay, this next trick is something that revolutionized my workflow when I found it out, multi-cursor editing. So before I would like, if I wanted to like, if I accidentally like copy and pasted this line wrong like with like the wrong spelling, I would have to go back and go like add E every single time, go over and manually add D. And that's really annoying. Instead, what I can do is using the Option key on Mac or the Control key on Windows, I can Option click. So hold the Option key and then click. And then now I have multiple cursors and I can edit multiple lines at the same time, right? I can pick as many places, I can pick like as many places as I want. If you want to sort of have multiple cursors delimited by some selection, what we can do is we can say add selection to next find match. So you can see on Mac, it's Control D. So when I type Control D, I'm selecting different ones and I can change it. Yeah, hello world. Now this can get quite annoying. Let's say you have like a ton of these. Rather than having to like highlight it, or let's use our handy dandy expand selection, rather than having to highlight every single one and holding it, that's quite annoying. We can also say select all occurrences, and that's Command-Shift-L on Mac. And then this will let us change it to the right spelling, hello world. Okay, so hopefully you've been following along thus far. For these next ones, I'm just gonna rapid fire through them. It's more important you just know they exist rather than getting practice, because I don't use these too often, but it's good to know. So here I can delete everything to the right of where I am. I can also delete everything to the left of me. I can delete an entire line. If I want, I can delete a single word. So I'm deleting the word before me, or I can delete word. I don't have a shortcut assigned for this one, but I can assign it if I wanted to. We know about backspace, that deletes behind you, but if you want, you can also delete ahead of you. So here I'm deleting a character to the right of myself. You can also transpose. So a lot of the time when I'm typing, I'll accidentally go like, instead of hello, I'll write like halal, because for whatever reason, the O came before the L. So rather than like going like that, I can actually just transpose them. So in between, and then Control T, and that'll transpose both. Oh, these ones are super useful. So let's say I want to convert something to complete uppercase. I can like select it and then go uppercase, and then I'll convert it to uppercase. I can also do lowercase. I can do title case. And let's say for variable names, this is in camel case, if you know what that is. If I want to convert it to snake case, I can also do snake case, and you can see it's much nicer now. You got underscore separating each word. Sometimes if you have like multiple lines for a single thing that you want to like convert down to one line, you can also use the join lines. That'll convert everything to a single line, which is super useful. And then also you can see this dictionary here is out of order. Well, dictionaries in Python don't have order, but when we're reading it, it might be nicer to have it in order. So we can actually say sort lines ascending. And if we want, we can also do sort lines, sort lines descending. I'm gonna go back to ascending. And then finally, we can also copy a line up and down, which is useful. And if you want, you can also select multiple lines and then copy the whole thing up and down. Okay, so that was sort of the rapid fire demonstration of some useful editing hacks. Now, editing hacks are great, but often in the real world, quote unquote, when you work with larger projects, you spend less time writing code and editing code than you actually do reading code and navigating code, especially with large code bases. So next, we're going to get into navigation hacks and code reading hacks. So let's go and type Command P, or in command palette, go to file, and let's go to navigate.js. Okay, so now that we're in navigate.js, we're going to get into some navigation tips and tricks. So the first one is super simple. It's called code folding. So when you have these nested functions and sort of scopes, you can click this button just to the left of the code and to the right of the line numbers, and you can fold certain functions. So this is just makes readability a bit better. If you want, you can also do fold all. That will fold every single function in your file. But if you want to unfold, you can also do unfold all, and that will unfold every single function in your file as well. Another useful one is let's say we have this line of code here, console.log hello world, and then console.log, and then this weird fib function. Let's say we want to go to where that fib function is defined. We can hold the command key on Mac. On Windows, it should be the control key, and we can actually click the function, and it'll take us to where it's defined. So here you can see I defined it at the very end of the file, right? So that's a pretty useful one as well. And we can also do that for files that aren't actually, or like functions and definitions that aren't actually inside our current file. So here you can see from some module, this sum module file I have here, I've imported this function called sum function. If I want to go to that, I can also do that using command click. And it takes me directly to the file where I've defined it. So go back. Okay, these next two ones are so useful. I can't like emphasize how useful these are. Especially when you're working with large code bases, these are a lifesaver. When you're working with really large code bases, navigating around the different files can be super cumbersome. Like, let's say you have like some functions defined and you want to go to them. It can be really annoying. Hold on, I got a question here. Finding the function is also Alt plus click on Windows. Oh, it's Alt plus click, not Control plus click. Okay, thank you for that. Anyways, yeah. So when you're working with large code bases, it can be annoying to be like, oh, where did I put like my I don't know, what's a good function, like my logger function, right? And then you might start clicking around and you sort of have to have a mental model of where everything is in your code, which is fine for like small, like just singular files, right? Like I know where my Fibonacci function is and I can just scroll there and go. But for larger code bases, what I might want to do is instead I can say, go to symbol in editor. So Command Shift O, or I don't know what it is on Mac, but just type in go to symbol in editor. And you can see here, it shows all the functions and variables and definitions here. So I can actually type in fib and it'll take me to the fib function within this file. If I want, I can also do it for symbols that are outside of my workspace, like outside of my current file and in the entire workspace. So let's say I wanted to go to the sum function. I can type this, go sum underscore module, and it should have worked. I don't know why it didn't work. Maybe it needs to be updated. Let me try that again. Sum function. Okay, it's not working for some reason, but it should normally work. What do we do to open the text box? Yeah, so as I said, I can't emphasize it enough. It's called command palette. On Mac, it should be command plus shift plus P. Whoops, plus P. On Windows, it should be control plus shift plus P. Oh, when I was searching functions and whatnot. So I always define everything like here, like see how I say go to definition or go to symbol. Whatever the comment I put here is, you can copy it and literally just paste it and it'll show you in command palette. So that's how you can get what the shortcut is. So this is it, right? I can click it and then you can see it replaced it with an @ sign. So actually, if I delete the @ sign and I put like the arrow, I'm opening command palette. If I put the @ sign back, I'm doing the go to symbol in editor. And I think the go to symbol in workspace is this hashtag over here. Okay. Another useful one is go back. So let's say I have my cursor set here and then I say, let me go to my fib function. If I want to go back to where I was before without scrolling, I can type go back and it'll take me to where I was before. And if I use the shortcut, I can actually go back. I can just keep going back and retrace my steps. And then I can also do go forward to trace my steps back in the forwards direction. So I should end up at the fib function. So using a go-to symbol in Workspace and go-to symbol in Editor combined with go back is something I use all the time. Also, there's go-to line. If you want go-to line, if you want to go to a specific line, so like let's say like line, I don't know, 100. Yeah, and it'll take me to line 100 as well. Okay, so that's sort of some navigating hacks. There's also language features. So VS Code comes with language features for JavaScript and TypeScript. So language feature include things like IntelliSense. So if we want to highlight over, let's say the fib function, we just put our cursor over the fib function. It actually gives us like some insight on what the code is actually doing. So function fib takes some number n and returns another number, and it tells us in the description computes the nth Fibonacci number using a naive recursive approach, right? And if we go to that function, you can see where it's getting that information. Here I defined a doc string in JavaScript, and that's where it's actually getting its information. And what's cool about that is I can actually highlight over even like console.log, and it'll show you some of the documentation for console.log. And it tells you right here, prints to std out with a new line. IntelliSense also comes with completions. So here I have the word console. If I type dot, then you can see it'll give me completions. So log is here, clear is here, all these functions. It tells you what you can do with console. So all these different variables and functions and that good stuff. Oh, and you can like complete it. So like if you do log, I think you can just type the enter button and it'll complete it for you. Language features also includes linting. So linting is basically error checking. So let's say I wrote like some bad code, right? Like this is like console dot. Yeah, like this is like this. This is bad code because you can see the dot doesn't have anything beside it. You can see it highlights it in a red squiggly, and it tells you identifier expected. So it's giving you the error here. Like if I tried to run this in JavaScript, like node.navigate.js. Oh, I didn't save the file. That's why it ran. Save the file, and then it tells you syntax error. This is really unwieldy, right? Like just error messages in general, they're just really, really unwieldy. It's nice to have it in line with your code. So someone asked, is IntelliSense on by default? VS Code comes with IntelliSense or just language features for JavaScript and TypeScript out of the box. For things like Python and other languages, you'll need to install their extensions. We'll get to that in the next part. We'll basically install the Python extension for the next part and demonstrate how to use language features with other languages. Okay, so IntelliSense, or sorry, linting, by the way, will also give you not just error checking, but suggestions and things like if you defined a variable but you never used it, it'll tell you like, hey, you defined this variable but you never used it. We talked about multi-cursor editing. So if I wanted, sometimes what I use with multi-cursor editing is I'll like select all for a certain variable name and I'll change it. So let's say I want to change this to my var. But the problem with that is, as you can see, I had this function named subtract, and I also had this variable named sub. So when I select all and I change the name, not only does it change like the sub variable, but also change subtract, and I don't want that. So language features also allows us to do something called rename symbol. And I can rename this to whatever I want. So let's call it my var. And I think you can do that for function calls too. Actually, I haven't tested this. Rename to myfunc, right? Myfunc. And it works as well. And then finally, another inbuilt language feature is format document. So here you can see really, really ugly JavaScript code, just inconsistent spacing. It's just really not it. So we can type format document, which is Command Option F on Mac, and it'll automatically format the document for us. Is it possible to turn IntelliSense on and off? I think so. IntelliSense. I think you can do like linting, for example, linting. Okay, I think you have to install like an extension to turn it off for JavaScript, but I know with Python, you can do something like linting and then turn it off. You can also do like, you can also turn off, I think you can also turn off IntelliSense. You might have to like Google the setting for that though. And then finally, for this last part, no need to follow along. I'll just demonstrate it. But there's some really powerful search features in VS Code as well. So you can do like normal search, right? Like search, or I'll just Command F, and I can search stuff. So let's search the word search. And you can see here, it actually highlights it on the right side, it's very faint. You might not be able to see it with my screen sharing, but on the right side, it'll show you where in the text editor it's being highlighted. Actually, even if I just select a word, it'll also have the same thing, but it'll give you this indication for where your cursor is. So let's search again. And you can see there's 3 options here. So the first option, what that does is match casing. So when I do that, it'll be strict about the capitalization. So you can see it stopped the capital S from being used. And if I make this a capital S, it'll only select the one that has capital. The second option is match the exact word. So for example, without this, if I type in like SEA, it'll highlight everything that has SEA in it. But if I do exact word match, you need the whole word to match. And of course, you can combine these as well. And then finally, this last one, if you know what regular expressions are, you can also use regular expressions. So let's say I have something like search, and then I have this regular expression. So match everything before, match everything after, but it also must end with a right bracket. So here you can say I'm using regular expressions. If you want, you can also replace stuff. So if you click this drop down here, you can replace. So let's replace the word, and I'm just going to match casing. I'm going to replace the word search with find. If I click this button here, the singular one, it'll replace one by one as I go. If I click the other one, it'll replace them all. Now, if I want to not just find and replace inside a file, I want to do it across my whole workspace, I can use this, the button on the left side here, the magnifying glass, and that will do it across your entire workspace. So let's say I search the word search. You can see it shows up 5 results in 5 different files. So I can go to like, I don't know, let's go to my readme.md, and it takes me to my readme.md where I had the word search in it. And again, you can use the replace feature and all the regular expression matching, capitalization, all that good stuff. Cool. So that sort of ends the navigation tips and tricks and hacks that you can use in VS Code. The next part is probably, it kind of combines everything we've done and also adds sort of real life important things like code quality and Git. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up, I'm going to move this out of the way because it's a bit annoying. Let's open up the next one, which is example.py. So in example.py, we basically have this script that does the following. Checks if a given number can be expressed as the sum of 2 Fibonacci numbers. So that's a lot to take in, but let's start with the first part of that. The Fibonacci sequence, or the Fibonacci numbers, is just a sequence of numbers that starts like this, 0, 1, and then after these first 2 ones, it's just going to be the sum of the previous 2 numbers. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 8, 13, ... So that's the Fibonacci sequence. And that's what this function does here. It computes the first n numbers of the Fibonacci sequence from the 0th number, which is 0, and then to n, and it doesn't include the nth number. And we're going to take it for granted that this function works as intended and works how we want it to work. Now, the second part of that is it says, checks if a number can be expressed as the sum of 2 numbers, so the 2 sum. Now, if you know what the 2 sum problem is, this will be quite intuitive to you. But if you don't know what the 2 sum problem is, I'm going to open this GIF. And I'm going to show you guys. Basically, in the 2 sum problem, you're given some target sum. You're given an array of numbers. And you're asked, can I find 2 numbers or 2 elements in my array such that the sum of those 2 numbers adds to 9? So in this case, the answer is yes, because the number 2 and the number 7 add up to 9. So at a high level, that's what the 2 sum problem is. And this implementation, the brute force implementation, just checks every single pair and checks if they sum to target. And that's this implementation used in this file. It's the brute force solution. And the next function we have here is test 2 sum. So here we're testing if our 2 sum function works, and we have some examples. So this first example, I have the numbers 1 and 2, and then my target is 3. So the answer here is true, right? We want to return true if it's possible, because 2 plus 1 is 3. This next example, we have these numbers, and the sum is 5. Again, it's true because you can do 4 plus 1, and you can also do, if you wanted, 2 plus 3. And the next 2 examples are false. So you can't figure out a way to get to 100 using these numbers. And also this last one is also false because there's no two numbers. Now 4, you could have 4 twice, but we need to have 2 different elements. They have to be completely different elements in the list. So you can't use the same number twice. So, and then we have the code here that actually runs the test. And then we have the main code here, the code that runs basically what we want, which basically what this part does is it computes the Fibonacci sequence up to 10 numbers in the sequence, and then it checks the target sum. So let's say I run this file, right? That's now that we have the necessary background. Let's say I run Python example.py. So the way I ran it is I opened up my integrated terminal, right? I opened up integrated terminal, and I just typed the command as I normally would, right? Python example.py. If you know how to use Python, this is pretty standard to you. And the output here, as you can see, tells us we got an assertion error at this line. Another cool feature about VS Code is in the integrated terminal, if you hold the command key, and you can actually click and go to where the error happened. So I can click. Whoops, sorry. Oh, sorry. I forgot to do this part. Before we move on, sorry. We want to install the Python extension that gives you language features. So right now, we don't have any language features. So let's say I do something like import math, right? Like the math library in Python. And I want to do like math.cosine. You can see cosine doesn't appear, right? Only the words I have in my file appear. That's because we don't have language features for Python installed. Only VS Code only comes with language features for TypeScript and JavaScript out of the box. So what we're going to do is we're going to install the Python extension. So let's go ahead and click this at the bottom, this Tetris looking icon, and we're going to search Python. Click the first option and then click install. I already have it installed, but I have it disabled. So I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And then once that's installed, it should take about a couple of seconds. We're going to go back and we're going to go back to this file. So now let's go back. Python example.py. Now with the language features installed, I can actually, I think I might have to reload my window. Let me do that. Reload for it to take effect. Reload window. It's going to reload. Let's just make sure it works. Import math. Whoops. Import math. Yeah, there we go. So we can do like math dot, and then you can see all the math options are showing up, all the different functions in the math module. Okay. Okay, so with that, what we can do now is let's run our file again, python example.py. By the way, this last part, the real life example, you don't have to follow along. I'm going to be going pretty quickly. I'd rather have you guys just listen to this part and understand what a real life workflow what a workflow looks like. So feel free to like sit back and watch this part. Okay, so we got this assertion error. What we can actually do is we can actually go to the specific line. I don't know why it's not letting me go to line. Typically, when I tested this out earlier, maybe line 34. Huh. Maybe if I run the Python file normally. So if you click this button in the top right, there's another way to run the file. You can just click the run button. Yeah, there you go. So now I can actually go to the exact line. So here I can command click, and it'll take me to the line where the error was run. How are you running it with the terminal commands? So I'm assuming this is coming from a question from someone who might have just used an IDE before. When you use an IDE and you hit the run button, what your IDE is doing in the background is it's just running your file like this. It's doing this in the background. It's saying Python example.py in like a shell script or something like that. That's how it's actually running it. So this is like the normal way to run it. You can see when I actually click the run button here, what's happening is VS Code opened my terminal. It uses the Python thing, which this is just the full path for my Python installation. And then this is the full path for the script, and it's running effectively the same thing. It's doing the exact same thing. So those are two different ways to run files in VS Code. I'm just going to comment this out because we've done this. So next, what we want to do is we want to debug our code. So you can see we had an error here, right? Python example.py. We had the error on line 31. So we're going to comment this out. Let's run it again. Whoops. Python example.py. And okay, so without that, it ran, the tests passed, and 15 is within the first 10 numbers in the Fibonacci sequence, so it returns true. Sounds good. But we want to figure out why we were getting an error here. So we're actually going to do some debugging. So if we click the debug tab on the left side, it'll open up this sort of debug interface. And what we can do with that is on your thing, I think on my thing, actually, let me delete this. Let me delete this for now. I'll come back to this later. Let me delete that. And let me delete this as well. Normally, what would happen is this run and debug thing would show up, and you can just debug a Python file like that. For us, I've added some things so we can do it a little bit more easy. But when you run, if you just click the button on the top left, for you guys, just click the button. It should run debugging, and you can see it shows the exception error in line with our code. Now, what we can do is with debugging, normally what you might do is you might do something like a print statement here. You might do like print I, print j. I also want to know print nums at I. I also want to know what my value of print nums at j is. I want to know why I'm getting an assertion error, right? My test is failing. And then I would run my script normally, right? If I go back to my thing, I'd run it normally, and then I would look through my print results and figure it out. Now this is messy because now we have print results from previous ones, so we might want to like comment this out and then run it. But then what if you forget like to uncomment it afterward? Then you break your code, right? It's just not a fun experience. It works for small workflows, but once you scale your workflow and you do like more with your code, it's really not feasible. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the debug feature. So with the debug feature, we're going to set a breakpoint where we're going to tell the debugger, run the code, but once you reach this line of code, stop and give me control. So to the left of the lines, when you hover over them, you'll see when you're in the debug view, you'll get this like little red dot. And on line 28, I'm going to click the red dot. And what it'll do is it'll add a breakpoint. So when my code reaches line 28, it will stop. So let's run the code again. So when I open the debug view, I get all these buttons. So if I click this refresh button, it'll restart the debugger. And you can see it stopped at line 28. I can also continue. So I can just say, hey, just continue the entire code session. I can hit the continue button and that'll continue. And then we get back to square one. We can see the assertion error. I can also stop the debugging session by hitting the quit button. And then I can start it again, of course. Okay, so now that we're back here on line 28, there are 3 buttons here that you guys should take note of. There's the step into, step out of, and step over. What the step over button will do is when you click it, it won't enter the function. So you can see it ran to some, like it ran this line of code, but it didn't go inside the line of code. So I can choose to go into it. So let's click the go into button. And you can see I go inside the function. My buttons went away. Is there a way to open them up again? I think command palette always comes to the rescue. Command palette, you can type like debug, start debugging. Yeah, start debugging. And you can probably start debugging again. If ever in doubt, you can probably find it through command palette. Like I didn't know that was a thing, but if not, you can always click the debug button again. I think that should work as well. Anyways, so we're back inside. And now we're debugging, and you can see what's happening here on the left side is it's showing us what our variables are. So right now it's saying nums is 4, 2, 3, 1, and saying target is 5, right? That's what happened here. On this line of code we entered, we gave it nums equals 4, 2, 3, 1, and we gave it 5, right? And as we step into and we keep going, you can see it says, oh, I is 0, right? J is 0, and then it sort of keeps going, and we can sort of watch what happens as the program is progressing. So we're basically looking at what Python is actually doing step by step. So this is how we can debug our code, right? And then you can see at this point, it's saying I at 0 and J at 0 is 3. And then so 4 plus 1 equals 5. It's good. What we can also do is we can actually put expressions here in the watch thing. So for me, when you have like really large files, you're gonna have a lot of variables here and you're not gonna know what you wanna look for. It's going to be like scattered. So what we can actually do is we can add Python expressions here. So let's say I want to know what the value of I is at any given point. I can just type I. I want to know what the value of J is. I want to know what the value of nums at I is. I also want to know the value of nums at J. And maybe I also want to know what the sum of those two things are. So nums at I plus nums at j. So this is extremely powerful, right? Like if I keep going and I step into the next function, you can see originally it has a name error, but as I step through, it's updating the values and we can see what our code is doing at any given step. And if we don't want to finish executing this function, we can step out of it as well. And that will bring us back to where we were before. Okay, so let's figure out what's actually happening wrong with our function. So here, this last assertion failed. So let's go into it. Okay, so it starts with the correct values of nums and target. So we want that. Starts with I equals 0. That's what we want, right? We want to start with the first element, which is 4. But then nums at j is also 4. Now this is a problem. We don't want to repeat the same element, right? We want to start with the next element. So that's the bug in our code. And to fix it, what we're going to do is we're going to do I plus 1, and that should fix our error. So let's restart. And let's actually put our breakpoint to where we want it so we don't waste time. Let's restart again. Step into it, and you can see, okay, now j is 1, which is good. This is exactly the behavior we want. And then we can sort of step through, and it should exhaust all the options, and as we desired, it will return false. You might need to save the file. Here's another thing to know. Like when you make changes to a file, you'll see this little dot show up, which means that you've made changes, but it hasn't been saved. But if you hit Control S, you might need to save it before the changes get implemented. Okay. Is anyone having issues with getting debugging to work? I think after you add the I plus 1 on the second line, j, if you don't have Python, this is not going to work. So this part, feel free to watch. If you don't have Python installed, you can install it later, watch the recording, come back and make it work. Okay. So with this fixed, let's move on. So we've done the debugging part. Let's move on to Git integration with VSCode. Now, if you don't know what Git is, I'm not going to explain it because it's sort of hard to explain. If you don't know it, you're going to be confused for the next 5 or so minutes. But for those who do know it, this will be really valuable information. But TLDR Git is basically a source control software that helps you keep track of the different versions of your code and lets you collaborate. Okay, so normally a Git workflow might look like this, right? We open up terminal, we type like Git status, and we see, okay, we've made these modifications. Let's say I want to commit and add my changes from edit.js. I do git add edit.py, and then I say git commit -m edited edit.py pun intended, something like that. And then we make our change. That's great. And then you can see we've made our change. But what we can also do is we can click the source code management button on the left that has like sort of the source tree icon, and we can see what files we've made changes for. And in fact, if we click one of these files, let's click navigate.js, we can actually get a side-by-side diff of what changes we've made. So you can see here's the original file on the left, and here's our updated file that we've made changes with. And we can see line by line what we've made, like what changes we've made. If we want, we can also just click the plus button here, and that should stage our change, and we can also commit it as normal. So commit message is updated content for navigate.js or something like that. Updated content, I don't know, whatever you want to put. And then we can commit it. And just to verify that everything's been committed, let's open up terminal again. I can do git log. And as you can see, our 2 most recent commits were updated content and, whoops, let me make this a little bit bigger, updated content and edited edit.py. Okay, cool. By the way, as I said before, command palette is the most important thing to know from this workshop. You can commit code straight from command palette, type your commit message here. You can also stage commits. You can do like statuses. You can do whatever you want with command palette. Now, throughout the workshop, you might have noticed like every time I edit a line, you'll see like these weird changes being updated on the left side. This is called the Git gutter. Git gutter basically shows us an inline view of what changes that we have made. So you can see here, I can click this and it shows you inline, oh, I've made these changes, right? I've changed I to I+1 here. If I want, I can revert this code. I can hit the revert button and it'll bring me back to what it used to be. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now, the reason this is really, really useful is because in the real world, what I just did before, which was like committing an entire file and writing a non-descriptive commit message, is terrible practice. Like for example, let's say we wanted to wrap this code inside some like main identifier. So if _name equals main, this is a common in Python code, right? And we wrapped this entire thing in the main identifier. And then I committed this whole file. I'm sort of committing two separate changes in the same commit. I'm doing a bug fix, and I'm also wrapping it in main. Let's say I need to revert back my bug fix code because my bug fix had a bug in it, right? That stuff happens all the time. I would also end up reverting back my main function, which may break my code. This is just, it's not really good practice. We want to containerize and isolate our commits as best we can. And so VS Code makes that super easy. Let's do it one by one, right? Let's first commit the bug fix. So we staged the change for the bug fix. And open up terminal, or better yet, git commit. And then let's type in fixed inner loop starting index that caused toSum to use same element in solution, something like that. Right, that's our very descriptive message. And then now this commit only contains that one fix. And then here we can oppositely, we can do the same thing. We can add each one of these additions, and we can say git commit wrapped tests and run code in main check. Yeah, so that is really great now because now we have two separate commits, which is really good practice, especially when you're working with other people and on large code bases. If you're working on like a personal project by yourself, I still encourage you to do this just to get in the habit of it. But even in those cases, like if you look at my commit history for this GitHub repo, I did that a little bit too. So, but it's good to get in the habit of this. Okay, so with that out of the way, we stage commits. That's pretty useful. Okay, next. By default, the Python extension doesn't come with linting. So if I wrote some bad code here, like let's say I wrote like math dot, as you can see, it doesn't show any like linting. It won't show the error. So if I type in Python example.py, it shows the syntax error here, but it didn't show it in the code editor. That's because only TypeScript and JavaScript come with linting by default. For Python linting, we'll need to install our own linter. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's install. Now, if you know how to use Python, you'll know how to do this. But pip install pylint. That should install pylint. And then what we can tell VS Code is linting, right? Enable linting, and then linting, run linting, and then give it a second. And now you can see all of these suggestions show up. Consider using enumerate instead of iterating with range, right? Or if we wrote a complete error and save, it'll tell us invalid syntax. We can also, if we want, install a formatter. So again, Python doesn't come, like the Python extension doesn't come with the default formatter. So we're going to install one, pip install black. This is the one I mostly recommend. So with black installed, what I can do is I can say format document with Python, whoops, use black. It should Whoops, there we go. That's not what we want to do. Did I install Black? Hold on. I did. It should work. Hold on. Format document. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. So now you can see it formatted the document using the Black formatter. And you can replace this with whatever you want, right? Auto Pep 8, Flake 8, I don't know what you guys use, whatever it is, you can replace it with whatever you want. And actually, if we go to our files, you can see VS Code made this .vscode folder. If I go to settings.json, it actually specified the settings for this repository, for this like workspace. Python linting has been enabled, and formatting has been provided, is being provided by the Black extension or the Black package. Okay, so that's formatting out of the way. Okay, let's briefly talk. I'm gonna quickly write some code here. I'm gonna do it pretty quickly, but let's say I wanna add a command line interface to my script, right? So I'm gonna create a parser, parser equals argparse dot argument parser. And I'm gonna say check, and I'm actually just gonna copy my description from up here. Let's do that. That's my description. And then let's say I do something like parser.add _ argument, and I want to add the --n argument. So I want the user to be able to choose how many Fibonacci numbers to check against, right? So that's my argument, and I want to tell them the type is like an integer, and the default value, the default value is going to be like 10, right? I also want to give them the option to do target _ sum, and then the default value is 15, type integer, parser.add argument. And then last one, I want to give, sorry, I don't need these double dashes. Last one, I want the user to be able to run tests optionally if they want to run it. So type equals Boolean, and default I'm going to say is false. With that, I can say args equals parser.parse args. And then now, instead of using all these variables, I can replace this. So let's get rid of this, and we can write args.n, and let's replace target sum, right? We can use that rename symbol with args.target _ sum. Okay, it doesn't have refactoring line, but that's fine. Let's do args.target sum, args.target sum, and then we can delete this line. And also, we're going to wrap the run test inside if args.run test. So if the user specified they want to run tests, then only run the tests. So now we have a nice command line interface. So if I type python example.py --help, argparse automatically will show the usage. So you can see I wrote my description here, checks if the user, check if a given number can be expressed using as a sum of two Fibonacci numbers. And then it has these positional arguments. Optionally, I can actually also describe just a detail of argparse. I think I can do like help equals, and then I can type like number of fib numbers to compute, right? Something like that, and it should appear. Anyways, but that's a little off topic. Yeah. With that, now I can specify things. I can like write in Python example.py. I want to test the first 100 Fibonacci numbers, and I want to check if 102 can be computed as the two sum. You can see it ran the code, target equals 102. These were my Fibonacci numbers, and indeed we can. I don't know what the combination is. It's probably somewhere here, but I'm not going to look for it. We can also, if we want, optionally, we can type the --run _ tests, the run tests option, and you can see now that what is it? Run tests. Oh, I got to do run tests equal true. And then you can see it also ran this line of code here. Okay, so now that we have a command line interface, why did I show you guys this, right? The reason I showed you this is because sometimes, let's say we want to run the following, right? We want to run this specific setup, like, I don't know, 10 and like, I don't know, 20. We want to run this setup like often for whatever reason. Having to type it out every single time in command line, if you don't like that, what you can do is you can create a task.json, and I deleted them, so let me revert them. VSCode tasks.json. Yeah. So this should be in your repo by default, but I've created this task.json file. You can Google the documentation for this and how this works. But basically, I labeled it an example task, run the following command. And so what I can do is I can say run task, and then you can see my task showed up here, and VS Code will run my task. So this is useful if you're especially useful if you're doing C++ development. You might have specific build configurations or deploy to production or something like that. You can define that in task.json. Oh, another really cool thing, a reason why I did this. For example, I create a lot of command line interfaces. So having to type this all out, you saw it took a lot of time. So what I can do is actually create a code snippet for this. So I already went ahead and created a code snippet for this, but I created this parser code snippet. You can see this little square icon shows up, and it automatically fills the code that I defined. So I can tab through this and fill this out. So it's really useful. So I can also do add _ argument. Now you guys won't have these code snippets. I define my own. If you want to make your own code snippets, just type in snippets and then go configure user snippets and then pick whatever language you want to define a snippet for. So here I defined one for Python, and I've defined these. You can look up the syntax online for what each thing does. But if there's certain snippets of code that you use a lot, I highly recommend you create code snippets for them. It'll save you a bit of time rather than having to, redo them every single time. Okay, cool. We showed task.json, and then we also showed the settings. And I'm just going to skip over launch.json because it's not as important. Now, I think these 3 settings here, or these 4 settings, are settings that I think everyone should have. So file, trim, trailing white space. So if I go to my settings, settings UI, and I say trim white space on save, whoops, and I check off this item, one of the things that happens when you code is if you leave, let's say I have this line of code, right? Let's say I add a space, right? You can see that it added a space, and then I get this really ugly Git diff where I didn't really make a change to the code, but because I added a space, it's saying I did, right? And that will get committed. And that just makes a really messy Git tree, and it's just not good for source control and exchanging files. So with the trim white space on save, when you hit Control S, it'll automatically get rid of any unnecessary white space in your file. That's just a really good code quality setting. Another good one is format on save. So if I go again and I do format on save, this one, rather than having to hit format document every time or use the shortcut, it will automatically format when I save the file. So let's say let's say I need to format this. Rather than hitting format document, I'm just going to hit the save button. Format document. Why isn't it saving? Should do it. I think I disabled it anyway. Format, UI. Whoops, format on save. Format, why is it not formatting? Hold up. Maybe I need to disable this. Format document with Python. Okay, for whatever reason, it ain't working, but this should work in a normal test case. This works in my normal VS Code environment. The environment I'm using right now, I'm using for the workshop, which I guess I just haven't set up properly. Okay, the next one is insert final new line. So I don't know why this is a thing, but in some instances, developers will add a new line, it's convention to add a random new line, just an empty new line at the end of your source files. So if you go to UI, it's new line, I think it's called. Insert final new line. When you hit Control S, it'll. Oh, I know why it's not formatting. It's because I have syntax error. This is a syntax error. So now when I hit Control S, yeah, there we go. Yeah, obviously it won't format the code if you have a syntax error in it, right? So make sure you have no syntax errors, and now when I hit Control S, it'll automatically do it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, so this last one, as I said, it'll add a new line to the end of the file, which is just convention. And this last one, I'm actually going to show you how settings work in VS Code. So if I go VS Code or settings, But this time, instead of going to the UI, I'm going to type Json. And I'm going to click Open Settings, not the default one, just Open Settings. You can see that this is how VS Code stores settings. Notice I have both the settings from my workspace and also my global settings, right? The settings from your workspace will override your global ones, but these are the sort of global ones that Python created. I put these two just to make it work with my Python level. You can see the Python extension automatically added this one, and then we added trim whitespace, and we added format on save, and we added files.insert new line, and we're going to go ahead and add editor ruler. And what that'll do is it'll add a ruler at the 80 character mark. It's a convention in a lot of cases that you shouldn't let characters go over the 80 mark. I don't know why. I think back in the day, like you had really small computers and stuff, so it was like kind of necessary that you had code files like not be too long, because you know how you couldn't like scroll to the right, you just went up and down, and so you get like the words wrapping. But that convention still carries on. So like it's a bad idea to have like comments that go like super long, and it's nice to know where that 80 cutoff is. Although I think code formatters will automatically make sure it doesn't go over the 80 mark. But if it's like a string, it won't do that though. Okay, so those are some really useful settings. Now this concludes like the main like interactive slash really tips and tricks part of it. I briefly touched over settings, but that's also how keyboard shortcuts work as well. If I go like keyboard shortcuts JSON, oops, that's the default one, keyboard JSON, and I just open up the general one, you can see, I remember when I added this one for smart select or expand selection, this is where it saves your settings. You don't have to use the JSON UI. You can always just use the normal one, keyboard UI, keyboard shortcuts, and then just use whatever they give you. But I also wanted to explain that this is also one way that VS Code stores your settings. If we want, we can also change the theme in VS Code. So you can just type in theme, and you can change to the different color themes. By default, there are only a couple installed, but you can go to the extensions library and install whatever theme you like. You can also change the icon theme, I think, icon theme. And there's like a couple they give you by default, but there are a bunch of really good ones available on the extension store, which is what we're going to talk about next before we wrap up, which is just some few notable extensions. If you click the link, or you just Google VS Code extensions, it'll take you to a marketplace with all the extensions. You can see the most popular extension is the Python one, because a lot of people program in Python. And then there's some more language ones. You can see there's some super useful ones like Git Lens. So this just makes the Git integration with VS Code even better. There's VS Code Icons, which is an icon theme for VS Code. There's the material theme. There's like Beautify, which is like a code formatter for JavaScript. There's like a bunch of things. There's Golang support, material theme, Intellisense for NPM and PHP. I mean, literally, there's an extension for anything and everything that you can imagine. And the list of extensions is always being updated, and it's growing. And it's actually quite easy to make your own extension, but that's probably another workshop. A few notable ones. I don't know. This is like a list of just some ones that I think might be of note. I'll actually demonstrate. So this is my own VS Code setup. When mine's very minimal. I don't have really any of this stuff that's bugging me around. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna open up my final report that I did for one of my courses. And I'm gonna open up my text file. You can see this is just a flat directory with a bunch of files. And I'm using an extension called LaTeX or LaTeX Workshop. And then if I type LaTeX Workshop and then view LaTeX PDF in VS Code tab, I can actually edit LaTeX code in with this updating automatically every time I hit save, right? So if you don't like the default LaTeX editor that LaTeX provides, or you don't want to use Overleaf or whatever, like for me, when I write stuff in LaTeX, I just use VS Code because I'm really comfortable with it, and it's pretty fast and it has some nice features. It also has like this thing called sync text, which I can I don't know. Let's say I go to Fibonacci. I go to this line. I can be like sync text, and then it'll take me to where that specific line is. Another really useful one is spell right. So this one just does like spelling check, like spell checking inside files, like text files and comments inside code, which can be useful so you don't embarrass yourself with bad spelling. Yeah, and these, I mean, definitely search these up, see if they work with your workflow, but they're super useful. This one I definitely want to highlight. Let's say you wanted to do some remote development, okay? So let's say you want to, like, I don't know, you open up terminal and you do something like SSH, like mills, right? Like modej@mills.mcmaster.ca, right? Like this is like the mill server provided by McMaster, right? Now, it could be annoying to have to develop inside here. Like, I'm not very good with Vim or with Nano. And so if I need to like regularly develop inside a virtual machine via SSH, I probably want to use VS Code. And VS Code comes with that functionality through the remote SSH extension. So I can actually do this. Let me copy this extension. So SSH connect to host. Let's connect to the current window to host. And I can put in my thing, so like root at host or whatever. This is just my shortcut for it. And then, lo and behold, give it a second. It'll ask you for your SSH password if you don't have auto SSH set up. And then give it a second. And now I'm actually connected to a virtual machine. Like even the integrated terminal is also integrated. So if I type in uname, which on Linux and Mac will give you the name of the operating system, you can see I'm running Linux. But if I open up my normal terminal and I type uname, you can see I have Darwin, which means Mac. So this is showing you that I actually do have, I have my setup, like it's in a remote machine. It's actually not like these files and stuff. Like if I open up a folder, like I don't know, like root slash config or something. I don't know if there's anything inside here, but like if I opened it up, like you can see that these files are actually not on my Mac. These are just like in the actual remote server. So that's also a really useful tool that I use all the time. Some additional resources, honestly, the best resources are in VS Code itself. Just type help in command palette, and there's a bunch of useful resources here, more introductory videos. There's also a tips and tricks page on the documentation page, which by the way, is super, super awesome. If you're like a Python developer or a Java developer, I highly recommend you skim through the documentation for your specific language. It'll basically answer all your questions and might teach you something of like how to set up your workflow for whatever language you're dealing with. And also I linked here as well another GitHub repository that heavily influenced my workshop that has sort of all the editing hacks and navigation hacks that I was talking about earlier. And then finally, if you're curious about what my setup is, you can click this link. That'll take you to just some settings that I use. So these are like my key bindings that I use. If you're curious what extensions I use, these are the extensions that I'm using. And also like my settings.json, and also some code snippets, like my LaTeX boilerplate or like my Python snippets. You can see here, I think I have my argparse one as well. So with that, that sort of concludes the workshop. I hope you got something valuable out of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat. So the question is, are all these Python specific or for VS Code in general? So most of the things that I showed you are in general. Now with the example.py, a lot of it was Python, like a little bit was Python specific. So if you like debug using JavaScript, there might be some small differences, but largely the experience should be the same. Oh, I was talking about the settings at the time. Oh yeah, that was quite a while ago. That was like 10 minutes ago. Which settings are you referring to specifically? Oh, I think you mean like the trim white space and whatnot, right? Those will be universal for all languages, all text. If you want to make it specifically, there's actually a really nice feature like called, you can actually do language specific settings VS Code. So I can, here, I think in the VS Code documentation, it's language. Yeah, if you go to this, I'll put it in the Zoom chat. If you just search up VS Code language specific settings, it'll actually show you how to define settings specifically for specific languages. So let's say for some, I don't know, for some reason, you don't want to save like auto format on save for like TypeScript files, right? You can specify that, say, hey, I don't want to, for TypeScript, don't do this, right? What's the hotkey to change those settings? I tried the search window, like the hotkey to change the settings. Oh, if you type preferences, colon, settings, there should be a bunch of options, include open settings, bracket JSON, and then open settings, bracket UI. The UI will give you a UI version of changing the settings where you can search what you want to change. The JSON version will give you like the actual configuration file, which, by the way, you can also Google, like when you on Google, if you ever like search like, oh, VS Code, how do I auto save on or auto format on save? Like if you like click the Stack Overflow link, they'll probably give you the JSON file line and not what it's called in the UI. So that's why I also wanted to show you guys what the JSON looked like, because it'll tell you like the exact configuration line to put in your JSON file. Reba, I think you can stop recording if you haven't already.